You said that you do politics you're doing it at A level or something, right?
Yeah, I've just finished now.
Did you cover post-colonialism or colonialism?
Not really, but like I know about it from some research I've done.
Okay, fine. Do you know about Orientalism, Edward Said's book?
No, sorry.
Okay, so this book is like, you probably, if you plan to do politics at uni, this is like the cornerstone book for this subject. So I recommend you get it on Amazon or whatever. But Edward Said was basically, he was a US born Palestinian. So he was an American Palestinian Christian. And he was the first person to go through all of the colonial material, like paintings, literature, artwork, poetry, all done by Europeans that traveled to North Africa and the Middle East. And he studied all of them, and he recognized that there was an element of dehumanization in what they were doing. So when they would paint, I'm sure you've seen these kind of like elaborate paintings of like women smoking shisha in a hammam or something, right?
Yeah.
So his view was that this was kind of dehumanizing and sexualized, and that's what the colonizers, this is how they viewed the Arab society. They viewed the people as objects for study through poetry and art. So yeah, that's essentially the foundation for post-colonial thinking, is that it's that the Western Europeans that went to North Africa and the Middle East and colonized the area saw us as kind of indispensable objects for their grander political purpose.
Yeah, so like kind of like backwards and like uncivilized when they're portrayed like as barbaric in like paintings and stuff.
Exactly, precisely. So this is kind of weird, but I actually, in my degree, in my BA and MA, I specialized on Russia and Russia's war with Chechnya. My speciality wasn't the Arab world. And you can see the exact same narrative that Russian writers like Lermontov, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky wrote about the Chechen and Dagestani people, like the Muslims in the North Caucasus that Russia was colonizing. And they used to refer to them as uncivilized and kind of barbaric people that needed Russian education. It doesn't matter where you look, it's the same rhetoric. Even in India, in British India, it's the same thing. Like the British came to help, according to them, it was like, we're going to civilize them, help them understand how to eat and drink and whatever,
It's kind of like a savior complex. Like they think that they're better and they've got to like help them become more Western.
Exactly. But what's interesting is we've had our own superiority complex. Arabs have also experienced this. Like, have you heard the argument that when Muslimin went to North Africa and Spain, we introduced a lot of things to Europeans, like sanitation and this and that? Have you come across this kind of argument before?
Yeah.
So this is arguably, you could argue that's a similar argument. It's a colonial language. It's kind of like, look, the Muslims are coming to civilize you because you're barbaric and you're still in the Dark Ages and we need to drag you out of it. It's the same kind of rhetoric. But we need to train ourselves to identify it no matter who we are, like where we are on the political spectrum or where we are, if we're Muslims or not. But the bottom line is colonialism is colonialism.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's Orientalism. Sorry, I'm just writing notes at the same time.
Orientalism is when it's done from the Western perspective to the East. But when it's done from the Eastern perspective to the West, I'm not sure there isn't really a name for it. It's just called colonialism.
Yeah, but it's basically like they do it the same, like we did it sort of to Spain.
Exactly. Hannah, were you going to say something? Okay. Yeah, it's really difficult because obviously, it's hard to accept. Okay, no worries. We're just waiting on more participants, but we thought we'd start the recording. So it's hard to accept, obviously, as a Muslim, like that maybe some of the Muslim empires or caliphates or civilizations were imperial projects. Do you know what I mean? It's how, I mean, how do you feel about that? Do you kind of, is it difficult for you to kind of gauge that kind of opinion about it? Here, please. Emma, that's the question directed for you.
I'm really sorry. What was the question? Is it difficult to gauge what?
Like, you know, when someone identifies colonial behavior or expansionist behavior and they apply it to Arabs as well as the West. So when they say, okay, during this Islamic caliphate, when we were in Spain, this is an example of expansionism from our own part. Is that something that you find, is that a conversation that you find uncomfortable?
Slightly, yeah, because sometimes you forget that like sort of Arabs did it as well. And like in the Arab world as well, like we kind of sort of took over other places. And I think a lot of Arabs find that uncomfortable. See us as like the bad guy as well.
I agree. I found it uncomfortable for a while, but you begin to, you know, Malcolm X said something very interesting, which was that it's important. He said he stands for justice no matter whose interests it supports or whose interests it's against. And you begin to, as you study politics, as you get into it and stuff, obviously you guys already studied it for your A-levels, but you begin to develop this consistency. And then towards the end, you just become kind of, I don't want to use the word like, yeah, you just become kind of immune to the emotional side of it, and you can just say it. But it takes a while to get there. I probably got there about last year or the year before, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to like try and remove like emotion and like bias from it. But yeah, I do find that difficult sometimes.
But you guys are way ahead than I was at like when I was 18 or whatever.
Bring me up to speed, man. In what way are they ahead?
So we're talking about, you know, Orientalism, Edward Said's book.
Yeah.
Where he kind of studies Western paintings, literature, poetry, whatever, targeted at the Arab world, and he finds that the Western perspective dehumanizes Arabs. During the colonial era, we were saying that technically the same kind of pattern emerged from the Muslim world to the Western world, when, for example, Muslims went and conquered Iberia, Spain. Technically, this is a form of colonialism, but I think we've struggled to have that conversation in our own community. It's very difficult for it, when it's you doing it, to recognize what's being done. Do you see what I'm saying?
But you're saying that they don't look at the invasion of Spain in the same way that they would look at the invasion of their own lands? Is that what you're trying to say?
Okay, so when colonizers justify their behavior, what they tend to say is, we're civilizing these people, we're teaching them how to eat, we're teaching them how to read and speak and all this crap. We heard it in Morocco, we heard all this crap as well. You know, like the French used to kind of argue that they're kind of making us all prim and proper, you know, in the French way, and they're refining our constitutions and they're enlightening us. Yeah, this is the European. But if you 1 second, Sean, yeah, if you listen deeply to our own rhetoric as Muslimin, as Arabs, technically we do say the same thing. Like when we talk about Islamic caliphates that have expanded into North Africa and Spain, we say, oh, we introduced this to these people, or we introduced maths, or we introduced sanitation or whatever. So how do you see that? Do you think that's I mean, I call it out for what it is. You know, it is what it is.
You're right. I think there was Arab colonialism,
yeah.
But people make a distinction, or should make a distinction, between the spread of the Islamic world, or like the Islamic expansion, and Arab colonialism. Like the Islamic expansion and Arab colonialism, they're two different forces. I mean, just from a kind of empirical point of view.
Okay, why do you think that?
Because, well, just from an empirical point of view, there were more, I don't know if you've heard this argument, but in the majority of regions in the Islamic caliphates, there were actually more non-Muslims than Muslims for like a couple of centuries. My brother-in-law Basif, who he's a kind of a scholar. My other brother-in-law is a Hafiz, and they are both students of Islamic history. So I'm quite privileged in terms of my family and the conversations I can have with informed people. But yeah, I've researched all of what they said, and everything they've said so far I've been able to back it up. And if true, that's incredible, isn't it? And you can also make a comparison as well to the. I don't think people could compare fully. I mean, there's a connection, but I don't think people would equate one thing with the other. That the reason that the world is converted to Christianity is only because of European imperialism, right? Like you don't hear that argument very often. I think that people use this argument about Arab colonialism, not in good faith, but as a way of attacking the Islamic faith.
Yeah, true.
In a way that they don't apply the same argument, even remotely, to the spread of Christianity around the globe.
True.
Could you argue it's not beneficial to bring up sometimes?
Yes.
Especially when people use it to like sort of say, well, yeah, it's happening to Muslims, but they did it. Isn't that sometimes people use it? I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't quite catch. Apologies, because I was replying to Sarah in the chat. Can you repeat? I'm really bad at multitasking. Can you repeat
I
that?
was saying, like, sometimes it's not always beneficial to bring it up, because sometimes people bring it up in the sense of, oh yeah, it's happening to Arabs, or it happened to Arabs, but they did it before that. So sometimes
yeah, no, what you're saying is really
the
true.
argument applied specifically to the slave trade. I'm sure you've heard that. Like they say that the slave trade was because of Arabs. Like you heard that one.
Yeah, yes, I have heard that one. But the thing is, before we get to that, obviously, we're having a general discussion about colonialism, so we will talk about this. What ML is touching on a really good point, which is that there is a psychological phenomenon. I forgot the name of it, but it's basically that we tend to romanticize historical events. So when things happen in your past, your brain remembers the highlights and it forgets the nuances, and some of those nuances could be negative. And I believe that the further back it happened, the more sympathetic we are towards that specific event. So like is that what you're trying to say? Because the Arab conquest happened so long ago that we still kind of see it as a soft kind of expansion or whatever. Okay, maybe not.
that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Yeah. Because it is what it is. I mean, I don't think as a Muslim we're unique, though. I think this is the difference. This is where my view diverges from the Islamophobic view that people that try to attack Muslim, they state that we are unique in our attempt to colonize and expand and take over people. Like it's a kind of a paranoia to the point of conspiracy. But I just view it in a matter of fact way. Everyone has expanded. Even if you look at the Christian Empire, the Roman Empire, it's the same. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Muslims took a side in that. I mean, people famously, I found that really interesting when I first started looking a bit more into Islamic history years and years ago, that the Muslims sided so clearly with the Romans against the Persians. Have you heard about this? Because obviously in the kind of formative days of Islam,
I didn't know that. Can you? That's really interesting.
Yeah, you can look into it, man. It's like really, there's a massive body of evidence of this in the kind of the Hadith and so on, where the Prophet in the really early days of Islam, the kind of wider regional context of it was that, the people in Arabia had seen centuries of war play out between the Romans and the Persians, and they were on the receiving end of the expansion by both of those empires too. I mean, they were kind of situated quite awkwardly between these two empires, and they were occupied a key role in the kind of Silk Road and the Indian Ocean trade network, like Egypt, which we talked about this recently, didn't we? That Egypt, which was seen on the bread basket of the Eastern Mediterranean, one of the major sources of food for the Roman Empire. Through Egypt, there was massive amounts of trade with like India, and a lot of that went, more than we know, it's quite insane actually, and a lot of that went through Arabia, to the extent that there was one particular Roman general that saw so much value in Arabia that he tried to conquer it, and his army got as far as Yemen at one point. But he was kicked out, and Persians too, as I said, but I know less specific stuff.
Do you know when this was? Do you know? Because obviously the Roman Empire was so long.
So this was like within like 3, 4, 5 centuries before the birth of Islam. The Prophet, but I'm saying, but this is their and this is their context. And in the days immediately prior to the rise of Islam, you saw the Roman Empire, what became known as the Byzantine Empire, in a long series of wars with the Sassanids, and the Muslims was rooting essentially for the Romans by saying that they're monotheists.
Wait, you said this was before Islam?
No, this was before and as Islam.
And after, yeah.
The monotheists in the region, so the Jews and so on, it appears rooted for the Romans, and the Muslims at least.
Exactly. This is the thing. People forget the politics.
They're monotheists, and they said that the Persians were shirky, that they worshipped their emperor, and they said.
I see. It's interesting that people would prefer to side with a non-Muslim over a Muslim with a different opinion.
The Persians weren't Muslims, yeah, bro. They weren't Muslims. The Persians were still pagan at that point. They worshipped their emperor was they were considered him a deity, much as the Egyptians did with their pharaohs and so on. That's a long precedent in Persian paganism. Sure.
Sorry, I didn't realize my screen is being shared. Is my screen being shared, Sean?
What do you mean by stream? I'm just seeing everyone's screens displayed equally. Yours isn't being.
Turn off screen share. Fine. Yeah. Okay. Nice one. Good idea. I'm just new to Zoom. So Sarah and the individual on the iPhone, I can't see your name, but do you have any opinion on this? You want to talk?
Yeah. I just thought it'd be a fun bit of trivia, but if you want to expand on it.
Okay. Okay. Sarah says she's here to listen. That's a sign of intelligence. Most intelligent people think that their opinions aren't good. So,
well, Oz loves it when I quote the Greeks, and Aristotle said that we have two ears and one mouth for a reason.
Yeah. The iPhone, the individual on the iPhone, welcome to the chat. Yeah.
Thank you, Osama. Yeah, it's Adam. I'm just here to listen as well.
Adam, nice. Do you have an opinion on what we're saying? Adam is a childhood friend of mine, by the way. He's also Moroccan.
All right.
Yeah. I joined late, so I only just caught the end of it. But no, I'm just here to listen, just understand and capture some knowledge, really. So.
Okay, fine. So, okay, well, everyone's welcome to jump in as they see fit. Hannah, is your mic attached? Selsabil? Okay, so it looks like it's me, you, and Emma, Sean, for now. But I know that Ziriab and a few others are going to jump on as well. So, okay. Connect your mics because it'll be interesting to hear your views. So, Sean, do you see a difference in the way? Obviously, you were born in Britain, right? Mm. Would you describe yourself as completely British, completely English, or semi-Dutch, semi-Jewish?
Identity, yeah. Well, I don't. As I've said probably about 1,000 times, I'm not a nationalist in any way. I kind of would say I'm anti-nationalist. So I try not to define myself by national identity. But so from a national point of view, as you know, I'm half English, I'm half Dutch. But in terms of how I would identify, I think one's culture is much more important. My dad's secular English culture to an extent. I was raised in that kind of way where I was always we were taught it was very important to be tolerant and pluralistic and so on and so on. But then my mother's Jewish culture had quite an impact as well. As I got older and matured, I would say I went more towards my Abrahamic roots in that, I don't know, I feel like you need a certain core belief system. You need a core set of values. And I don't know to what extent the West provides that these days. It seems like the only core value in the West is capitalism. And I know it's a real...
Wait, but do you see a difference in the way that, and everyone else feel free to jump in at this stage, do you see a difference in the way that the British colonized people and the way the French colonized people?
No, imperialism is right. It's just like nationalism on steroids, isn't it? You think that your national identity is not only great, it's so great that you have to kind of try and... it's okay to let others be consumed by it, to spread your identity by force. It's clearly wrong by default, but you could say, were some forms of imperial expansion worse than others? But then even that is hard to... You could try and talk about it from an empirical point of view in terms of how long were countries under the rule of this or that empire, how much bloodshed did it take to free them? Or are you talking about from a value point of view, like which empire had better values? Like, are you talking about
the differences, the nuances in the way that they? So, for example, it seems to me that the French are much more. They're much more about cultural influence. So, getting the person to speak French, putting the French flag in their schools, getting the individuals to join the French army. It's more like the French national project. Whereas with the British Empire, it seemed to be a business project. How can we get tea in the quickest way at the cheapest price from India to Britain, right? That this is the kind of difference that I know. Obviously, there are situations where you can find a British colonial project that is a cultural one and a French colonial project that's a business one, right? I accept that. But generally speaking, it seems to be that the French colonialism seems to be more ideologically motivated. It seems to be about expanding the French culture abroad.
I don't know about that. I think people, that might be a bit of a stereotype. Yeah, I know you just admitted that it could be a stereotype, but clearly it could be, in the sense that more people in the world speak English now than French. And you could argue that English language institutions and so on and so forth have more impact. And you could say that's partly because of the US. But
okay, but why do I speak like? Don't you think it's weird that someone in my situation speaks French? I'm born in the UK. I've lived here my whole life. My parents are Moroccan. As a Moroccan, that it doesn't even live there.
Yeah, but why do
I speak French?
Or anywhere, you know, like a Caribbean island that speaks English, for example, it's just as insane for them. I think the British were just more clever about it, in that they were the inheritors of the kind of Roman technique. Well, it doesn't just go back to the Romans, it goes back way before. You could see different empires, ones that actually are worse in the extent that they are more clever and therefore will last much, much longer. I think empires that try to impose their own cultural values beyond what they need to impose to kind of maintain some semblance of stability, because sometimes you'll have more stability and more chance of really long time, that's like centuries of conquest, if you allow a certain amount of autonomy, right? Like people, you just control them as much as you need to get money out of them. Mm-hmm. And then you leave them be, right? Like that goes back to the Romans, to the Persians, these empires that were really successful. They took the local power structures, took the local rulers or the local ruling class, and co-opted them into the imperial system. And that was just ended up being the case, that when you made these people very, very rich off the enslavement of their fellow of their countrymen, it turned out that they were more interested in preserving their economic interests. Like,
so you think there's no difference between what's it called? You say the British are exactly the same in their tentacles that they spread, right?
I just think that the English were just empirically more successful. Like the British Empire got larger, and they you could argue it was more harmful by the sheer fact that it was bigger. The British Empire was the largest empire in history in terms of landmass. That's just a fact, isn't it?
So Hannah and Emmett, they're mentioning in the chat that obviously there are certain Italian words in the Libyan language, like familia, cucina. We say cucina as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's, like, once you realize sometimes how much of the Libyan dialect is actually Italian, it's actually a bit mad. Like, if you go on Wikipedia, there's a whole Wikipedia page that just gives you a list of, like, all the words that are, like, we use every day, like things like cucina. And
so what do I type? Italian words in Libyan?
Yeah.
Is your dialect of Arabic called Darija as well, or is it?
No.
No. Does it have a name, your dialect of Arabic?
I've never heard one. But no, I don't think.
Yeah, it's just called Libyan Arabic.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've got Salita. What's that? Salita, slope.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's mad. That's crazy. I didn't realize there was this many.
Mudsha baby. Yeah, we say that. These are all words that we just like. It's as if it's just part of our Arabic. You wouldn't even realize it.
We say baño as well, but cocina and baño, we say it because it's Spanish.
Yeah.
To be fair, like a lot of Arabic, a lot of other languages have words from Arabic influence, like algebra, alcohol, all sorts of words like that come from Arabic.
True. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, especially Spanish. Spanish is literally Arabic. Like, it's
But also, to go back to my earlier point, where maybe we should redirect it back to this, that there you have to make that distinction between the spread of hard power and soft power, which can be religion, because I talked about the spread of Christianity and Islam. Like language, culture, religion it can be spread as a sort of side effect of empire without being intentionally spread, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense.
But the projection of soft power, I think, is quite an interesting question.
Yeah, but the thing is, Sean, with like the Caribbean, or let's say with some African countries, you have English being spread there, and then there's still their local language, right? So, for example, if we take you know, like Ghana is a good example of this. I forgot the names of the local language; it slips my mind. Yeah, and you have English and French at the side. But the thing is, the French colonialism and the Spanish colonialism in North Africa has infiltrated our own language to the extent that we, like Hannah and Emil said in the Libyan case, we're using French and Spanish words, and we don't even realize that they're not Arabic words. Like it is institutionalized in our Arabic. They've infiltrated our Arabic. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like, let me give you an example. If I was to say, car in Arabic in Morocco is tomobil. Yeah. So if you want to say I'm going to my car, you say ana ghadi tomobil or tomobilti. But tomobil comes from French, automobile. Yeah. But it's literally written in Arabic, like like it's just a complete form of like infiltration in the culture and the language.
Yeah. Fair point.
But what confuses me today is that people are there's a lot of people that are proud of that. Like it's sometimes seen, I don't know if this is the same in Libya with the Italian case, but it's seen in Morocco like a prestigious thing to talk French. It's seen as like you're an elite member of society, you're elevated.
So is your problem more with the fact that there is that prestige attached to speaking the colonial language rather than, because my contention kind of alluded to, you know, with some of these words, you could characterize it as soft power rather than hard power, because I assume, I'm not a linguist, but with some of these words, you could say that there might not have been a word in Arabic for that object, and they just kind of adopted it. So that is not, it is not.
There's a word for kitchen in Arabic.
Say that again.
We've got a word for kitchen in Arabic, but in Libya, people still use kuzhina instead of matbakh.
Well, then, yeah, that's an interesting point, then, definitely.
Yeah, and also, Sean, even new words.
Words are repurposed as well.
Sorry, say that again?
Like, words are repurposed. In Arabic, you would have, for telephone, you would say hatif.
Exactly. That's what I was
going back to when you were thinking about communication with, like it's basically they repurpose old words for a new phenomenon. So hatif in the old Arabic has meant to be like communication with someone who wasn't there, like physically, right?
Did you get that?
Hatif then repurposed for telephone.
Sorry, sir, you're quite faint. Is it
so
just
he's saying that they would repurpose old words in Arabic for new technologies. So, for example, hatif for telephone, which Ziriab, you said hatif means communication, right?
So yeah, it's to do with like non-physical communication in the sense of the person you're communicating with isn't in front of you, kind of thing.
Yeah,
but Sean has a completely different concept. But yeah.
But my main gripe is not necessarily that we're making, because okay, like maybe we can rebrand and redefine something that's a colonial export. You know, why not? Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that moves us away from it as much as it brings us into it, right? But the problem that I have is, why don't we view our own language, our own historic culture with that level of kind of like, why aren't we that impressed by Arabic? Arabic is such a deep language. Like, why are we only impressed by French and European languages to make ourselves seem upper class? You see what I'm saying?
But maybe that's my romanticism as a convert, but I kind of always assumed that the Arabic language was held in amazingly high esteem. You know, it's the canonical language of Islam. I mean, maybe that's something I'm completely unaware of, being an outsider to that, not being an Arab. That, yeah, I don't doubt you necessarily, but I would love to hear more about that. I mean, I'm not saying you can give me all of that knowledge in one Zoom chat, but that's fascinating to me that people maybe who grew up in that part of the world would not see Arabic in that way, or not see it on the same level as like the European languages, when my view was.
I agree with what Osama was saying. And like, I think because of colonialism, you know, you've seen like the white man in a more powerful position telling everyone what to do. And you can still see like that negative effect, people preferring like Western languages, people preferring whiter skin. Like even as like a 10-year-old in Libya, I was given like skin whitening cream as a gift by someone. Mum put it straight in the bin, but you know, that was still something that someone did. And that's really common. And I think because of colonialism, people see like white is better, the West is better, like what languages associated with white people, if that makes sense.
Did you guys see that ad in China? Oz, I don't know if you ever saw it, but this was a few years back.
I've seen it.
Really shocking, yeah.
And in India, the Fair and Lovely ad.
Oh, right.
No, well, it might be, that's another one in India, but I saw a Chinese TV ad, which got a lot of backlash around the world on Twitter and so on, where this Chinese lady pushed a black man into a washing machine and he came out white, and it was like, good job or whatever. And I was like,
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah.
Wow. I couldn't believe it. Like, it's so internalized, that racism. Like,
It is.
Even more recently, there's like a trend on TikTok literally now where people are using this app to like darken their skin, and then they're moving the app to show them as like a better looking. And I think it's really negatively impacted people.
Well, my wife Samina's told you this, hasn't she? But my sister-in-law, she's darker than Samina. Like, it's like subtle. I mean, I wouldn't say she was that much darker, but it's subtle, right? But when she went to Pakistan, when they went there as kids to see their extended family and so on and so on, Samina said Iram had massive issues about it because she had so many comments about how she was slightly darker than her sister, and saying, like, people, I think sometimes openly saying, what a shame it is that you're not as palish as your sister. And I'm like, really? Like, your own family telling you that? And then one of my good friends, a girl called Fahima, she's like a teacher up in Birmingham, and I kind of brainstormed with her about, because we're both teachers, but she has a really beautiful little girl recently, and I said, I was like, mashallah, she's such a sweet kid, and so on and so on. She said, you thought, she then said to me straight up that was one of the sweetest comments that you made to me just now, and it frustrates me so much that I get that from you, a white guy, when some people in my own family, because she knows me quite well, so she confided this, and a lot of people in her own family and her own circle of friends had commented on the fact that she had got her husband's skin tone. Her husband's darker than she is, and the amount of people that commented on it just had really depressed her.
That's terrible.
It's you see that. Sorry.
Sorry, no, yeah, it's just sorry for sharing those anecdotes, guys. But
go ahead, Hannah.
Yeah,
you see that a lot, especially with kids. With kids and brides, I've always noticed it. It's like, say there's like two kids and one sibling is darker than the other. It's like, oh, she's so much prettier and whatever.
Yeah.
And with like a bride, if the husband is like white and the bride isn't, like, people will just go at them. Do you know what I mean? It's horrible. But what you said about language, I've not really seen, like, in Libya, I don't think people necessarily romanticize like Italian or just that like westernized side.
In Libya, if you're speaking Italian, it's not going to go down well with you.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
He really hated the Italian occupation. And there's
definitely resentment. Omar Mukhtar, he's like
they praise
completely
him.
idolized. Like, his graffiti is everywhere, all over the cities.
Good.
Yeah.
Remember when Gaddafi went to Berlusconi wearing Mukhtar on his chest?
Yeah, that was a good move. That was a good move. I'm not getting. But Adam.
Everywhere.
I wanted to. Adam, are you there? Okay, maybe he's.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, I am. I was on mute.
No worries. Basically, Adam is from the north of Morocco, which is the Spanish influenced part. I'm from the French influenced part, the middle of Morocco. So, Adam, is it seen as a prestigious thing in Tanja for people to speak Spanish? Does it make them like an upper class person or whatever? Is it like Fez?
I don't think it's just Spanish. I think it's European, just any other language other than Arabic.
I agree. Because the thing is, when it's our own Arabic, like you said, Sean, you were saying that, hang on, I thought classical Arabic was, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about our dialects of Arabic. It's true.
Oh, yeah, most definitely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They look down on our own dialect, but classical Arabic, it is seen as prestigious, but I would say that French is seen as more prestigious than classical Arabic in Morocco. Would you get that impression as well, Adam?
Yeah. Definitely. I think that's the same in like most of the Arab world.
Except Libya, as we just learned.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm gonna go back on myself a little bit, like contradict myself. There's a bit of it, not necessarily with Italian, but say, for example, like when I was a kid, and say I'd go and I'd start speaking English, they would be like, "Oh, she thinks she's so much better than us," and whatever. Do you know, like me and my siblings? But and especially, it's kind of weird because like us kids like in the West, you know, as we try and like distance ourselves or whatever from that whole colonialism side, the people back home, like people my age, like if they speak English, then they're like something else. Do you know what I mean? They're acting prestige and whatever. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a weird balance.
But also,
Yeah,
I think you look at the institutions as well that entrench these languages, not just the fact that an elite speaks another language. Just because just as a side point, I think it's quite interesting if you look even at the European countries, like the British elite, for a very long time, and even now, like the royal family and the aristocracy, it's seen as very prestigious to speak French, right? And to an extent, I think there's an element of it's not just race or colonialism, it's classism, in that the upper classes were seen as having enough leisure time to be able to learn other languages and like what are perceived as like high languages.
So do you think it's something about the way French has branded itself specifically, the French language?
It's not just about colonialism. I think French is also seen, even by other European countries, as being like a high language.
That's really interesting. That's a really interesting point.
I'm not so sure. I think with it, yeah, I'll answer that in a sec. I'll come back in a sec. But I just want to say, I'm not sure I'm in agreement, because if you take the whole kind of class paradigm, because if you take, for example, you mentioned North Morocco earlier, el-Khattabi, the famous guerrilla warfighter who was a civil servant at one point.
Amazing guy.
The guy who taught Mao, he like, well, Fidel Castro and all of them learned from him, Ho Chi Minh, Mao, all of these guerrilla fighters learned tactics from him. But my point is that he was a civil servant. He was a civil servant in the Spanish administration for in his early formative period. I don't think that you could class him as being from the quote unquote upper classes. And then obviously the way he then turned on the Spanish administrators and created the Republic of the Rift, and mobilized the people. He didn't, for example, he didn't institute Spanish as like the language in the Republic. So I'm not too sure about that as something like that.
Yeah.
Go on, Sean.
No, I just I'm wondering why he. I mean, I don't know about this individual in any depth, but I don't see what. I'm not sure what his point is. I'm not disputing his point. I'm just wanting to flesh it out in that this person could be influenced by other factors. Like, I know intersectionality has become a bit of a buzzword, but these things can play into each other. I wasn't disputing that colonialism and these other forces play a role. I'm saying that class can also come into it in terms of how we perceive certain languages. That was my only point.
Yeah, my contention is more with the kind of framing. I think it's more to do with the time, the kind of historical time frame. When what we're talking about when we're talking about the adoption of these languages is exactly the title of the show, colonialism. So when you're talking about the projection of power into the developing world, and you're talking about an imposition of cultural imperialism is the point. So cultural imperialism, I don't think it plays into the class struggle, because the cultural imperialists, by their kind of, by virtue of the setup, try to impose their cultural norms and everything that is wrapped up in that. What I'm saying is the way in which people then engage with that cultural imperialism is going to be pragmatic, meaning, like I say in the example that I gave, el-Khattabi, he worked in the administration, he learned Spanish, he was a journalist, he kind of, it was a pragmatic approach more than a salon type of approach, this kind of leisure type of approach.
Are you saying that him learning Spanish was a pragmatic approach?
Precisely, yeah.
Okay. So,
and the other point I want to say before you move on was when it comes to India, China, or any other world, I think colonialism played into underlying racial prejudices these societies have. Like, for example, in India, we know that it's a very hierarchical society. We know about Indian slavery. We know about the colorism that's inherent in the hierarchical Brahmin and the lowest rung, their name, the untouchables, the Dalits, yeah. So I'm thinking the cultural imperialism played into that, but I think it will be very unfair and quite woke to kind of completely pass the buck to the Europeans. Because I think what I'm saying is that the Europeans played into pre-existing prejudices wherever they went.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The Brahmins, they actually had the concept of the Aryans, didn't they? That kind of various European Nazi theorists borrowed. I mean, it's a very like the Indo-Aryans and all that stuff. It's yeah, they're symbiotic to an extent. But my point is, I don't disagree with anything you've said, Zoe, about the cultural imperialism. I think the way that class comes into it is that you say that someone could learn Spanish because it's a pragmatic thing for them to do so as a way of resisting cultural imperialism, let's say. But it might be a result of class that they had the ability to learn that language or had the access to the education that would be necessary to learn that language, for example. I'm not saying that is necessarily the case in this time, but class can mean the privileges or the resources or institutions that you have access to that other people just don't.
Can I just jump in? So basically, just for other people in the chat to understand, the guy that Ziria was going on about is el-Krim Khattabi. So Adam, he's from your part of Morocco. Maybe you've heard of him, from north of Morocco, and he was a key guerrilla leader. So guerrilla warfare. Obviously, most people know this, but the philosophy is to divide. If you've got small numbers compared to a larger number like Spain, like the Spanish army that were in Morocco at the time, you would divide your unit into smaller units, and then you would surround your army. So you place more of an emphasis on tactics and strategy than you would on your quantity to surround your army and defeat them or to defend your city. So what Ziriab is saying is that in this situation, el-Krim Khattabi learning Spanish and perhaps teaching it to other people benefited him to actually counter colonialism, because he understood his army could surround and infiltrate Spanish cells and understand what they're saying. And I presume, I don't know if the Libyans in the chat can confirm this, but presumably Omar Mukhtar understood Italian or some form of Italian. Is there any evidence for this?
I'm not sure if he did, but I'll look it up now.
Yeah, I'm checking now. And Ziriab, the reason I was asking about where you're from was because I wanted to draw parallels. I assumed you were from East Africa, but I wanted to draw parallels between the different form of colonialism in North Africa and East Africa.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, the thing is, there is a lot of parallels to be drawn. There was quite a lot of direct colonialism in East Africa as well as indirect. But I think for the most part, bearing the exception, there was direct colonialism, and perhaps the difference is more with the remnant, as in it seems like in North Africa there was a longer presence of the colonial legacy than there was in East Africa. And why I say that is, again, barring exceptions in North Africa, I'm pretty sure that there still exist communities from that colonial era across North Africa. I don't know if that's incorrect or correct.
Was East Africa colonized by Italians as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the British.
So this could also be a difference as well because of the person doing it. I agree that the effects in North Africa, I think they're more prominent. They're really more prominent. Like, they're so long lasting. Everything of ours has changed. Everything in Morocco has changed. The constitution, the roads, the way that we read stuff. Even the constitution is written in French. We got a French version and an Arabic version, which is really unusual. And
I told you this, but Samina's family, because obviously you know her quite well as well now, they often comment when I talk about our holiday to Morocco, and I tell them about our conversations, and when you talk to me about your culture, and they often bring up how fascinating they find Morocco because of how different it is from what they consider the Arabic mainstream. Like, I don't know if that's the experience that all Muslims, but with Pakistani Muslims anyway, at least a lot of the ones I've spoken to, when they talk about Morocco, one of the first things they bring up from, maybe, I don't know, like an Islamic point of view, is how much your language or your culture has been affected by the French. Like, you're seen, not just linguistically, but culturally, like, you're very secular compared to other, and they do that as a result of the French influence.
Well, there's things that we don't even like. For example, when we say hello to people and we kiss on both cheeks, like that's a French thing. It's actually very unusual for an Arab country to do that. Syria does it, I believe. Lebanon does it. So anyone that was touched by the French does it now. You know,
They don't know touch themselves. You know?
Yeah, exactly. But I think what we're missing as well here is the fact that technically the Arabs are also colonizers in North Africa. So I'm sure there will be a lot of Amazigh people who would watch this on YouTube later on, and then think, well, how are these Arabs talking about colonialism in the Arab world? And they're not talking about the fact that they, as Arabs, colonized Africa, you know? That's the bottom line. But this is the thing. It all comes down to all of these topics are intersectional. And this is why I'm really fascinated by Malcolm X, because I think that a lot of his lessons as a Black civil rights advocate, and the way that, you know, the Uncle Sam mentality was trying to infiltrate his own mind, we can apply it to ourselves. We can model like anti-colonialism in the Arab psyche around Malcolm X's perspective. That's my opinion. But I wanted to link it back to what you were saying about the slave trade, Sean, about Arabs being involved in the slave trade. Can you elaborate on that, please?
No, I was just saying that's an argument you hear a lot when people try to equate, when they try to attack the Arab world and Islam. Because you brought up the Islamic rule of Spain and the quote unquote Reconquista, and how is it different to talk about why do some Muslims romanticize one as opposed to the other? And I think all these things are related. I would say, because I mean, from my point of view, the reason why even I might romanticize the Muslim rule of Spain is because you could argue, look, everywhere was conquered by someone at some point, right? You have to talk about how quickly it happened, how many people were killed in the process, how much consent of the local people you had. And there are just so many things that play into it. If you're going to get into that game of comparing one form of imperialism to another, because, you know, you and I, and maybe a lot of us here, are fundamentally anti-nationalists. Like, in a utopian world, we wouldn't have these kind of nation states. But if you're going to get into that, then yeah, like, you could compare the Muslim rule to what was before and what was after. Like, before the Muslim rule, you had the kind of chaos immediately after the kind of Vandals and other quote unquote barbarian peoples conquered.
Is that Orientalism or whatever it's called that you were talking about, Osama?
Or Orientalism, yeah. It's Orientalism.
Call it barbaric before the Arab rule.
That's why I said quote unquote, because I don't know if you guys know, I thought this was fascinating the first time I learned this. The word barbarian literally, it stems from Greek, I believe barbaros, which is because the Greeks believed that anyone who didn't speak Greek went bar, so they said barbarians.
Exactly.
So, which is really interesting.
And that's what they called us, the Berbers, you know.
Yeah.
If you load up Age of Empires, I can share the screen and do it now. It literally says start a Berber conquest, and you can play as Tariq ibn Ziyad. And
we're equally nerdy. Yeah, but the instability, like Spain was considered one of the most prosperous regions. It had like the silver mines of the Western Roman Empire, but North Africa was actually considered possibly the most prosperous region of the Western Roman Empire. Which a lot of people don't know. It's fascinating. Like, a lot of the olive output of the Roman Empire, the economy was rooted in Northern Africa. Just
I didn't know that.
North African pride there, but
I didn't know that.
But the North African kept a lot of that quote unquote civilization, and when the Muslims conquered Spain, you could say by every metric that the country became. But this is what you're saying about how then is that different from the Europeans saying that they advanced it? I would say the difference is that when the Europeans went to the Americas, they imported the largest intercontinental slave trade the world's ever seen. They killed 90% of the locals by spreading things like smallpox, but also very intentionally in terms of enslaving the local populations. It's just, I'm wondering what you're getting at. Oh, sorry, I'm very wary of going off on a tangent. What is the purpose of bringing up that comparison, do you think? Why should we be comparing?
Basically, we need to understand our unique position as North Africans in terms of our own internalized racism and how we square our Arab identity with our African identity, and the power dynamic between the Arabs that colonized North Africa and the Amazigh and the Black community there as well.
Well, that means Allahu Akbar. The secret for me,
sorry,
is to focus on the Islam, not the Arab culture, because I very much resist that actually. And when I see that people idolizing the spread of Arab culture for its own sake, beyond the spread of Arabic that was necessary to spread those Islamic ideas that were good.
But intertwined with the Arab empire is the Islamic empire. It's a political and religious project. It always has been, in my opinion. It's been a mix of both.
But that's not possible. That's not. I said you can't completely interchange them, because, as I told you, in a lot of regions.
No, they're not interchangeable. I agree with you. They're not interchangeable, but they're connected. Like they're
Wait, are you viewing Berbers as being distinct, a distinct ethnic group? How do you view the Berbers?
I view the Amazigh as indigenous North Africans that were there, always there before the Arabs came.
That were always there. So you're talking about a continuity. Okay. So the Amazigh, in your view, are indigenous groups that have always been there.
Yeah.
And would you say they're distinct?
I would say right now they're not distinct. I think that at the moment, because of intermarriage, most North Africans are mixed. Everyone in this chat that's North African is going to be part Arab, part Amazigh, everyone. The ones that and we wrote an article on this, actually, like majority, let me load it actually, because it has the statistics and I don't want to make them up. But apparently we've got something like a 60-40 split of Arab blood and Amazigh blood, even if those that think they're Amazigh. Say that again.
So I just wondered, what do you believe then should be the right attitude? Like, what do you think would be a healthy state of affairs in the Arab world in terms of how people should interact with and view the kind of other ethnic groups and the quote unquote indigenous peoples of the region? And I'm just kind of trying to figure out what you're advocating.
Okay, I think it's healthy to, this is where I kind of agree with you about race being a bit of a bullshit construct, is that Arabs, North Africa. So yeah, I think it's healthy for us to realize that there isn't actually a difference between us, between the people, because obviously in North Africa now you have the Riafa in Morocco that want to split. So this is people from el-Khattabi's area. They want to split from the rest of Morocco and have their own state, because they believe that as Amazigh, they have been persecuted by the Arab state. So one of the gripes they had was the fact that the Amazigh language wasn't institutionalized in the system until recently, and they only just started teaching it in schools and stuff. But if you look at it, we're not actually different genetically. The difference is culture. The people that say I'm an Arab and the people that say I'm Amazigh or Berber, they just have a different culture or live in a different area or speak a different language. That's literally all it is.
But Oz, you're not complacent.
Well, wait, do they though? Because this is the other aspect in this. Could you mention the Western Sahara? Because the elephant in the room would be how separatist movements, especially in the developing world and in the world itself, lend themselves to colonialism, So the idea that these groups are distinct, I think flies in the face of history, which all of the intermarriage is talking about, and the intermixing, and the fact is, what is an Arab in terms of what is in terms of designation? Is it a collective language group? Is it a shared language? Basically, is it a race, a distinct race, an essential race? Is that how we're doing it? Because it depends on your categorization of what it means to be Arab, what it means to be Berber.
Yeah.
Then it depends if it's going to be a problem. Because even if you go back to any of the North African empires in the past, whether it's like the Rustamid Empire or like the Fatimid Empire or whatever, you would have all these different people that live under one polity, but are, that have distinct, perhaps, identities or whatever. But I'm saying they're all within a distinct polity in a sense, and they would share the language of Arabic. Perhaps they would even have their own local language as well. But as I say, without getting too deep into it, it depends on your categorization. So if we're working off different definitions for what it means to be Arab or what it means to be Berber, then we're going to be talking past each other. Do you know what I mean?
Fine. So can I ask so before I ask the Libyans in the chat, I want to ask Adam quickly. Adam, like, do you feel more Arab or do you feel more African? And also, what do you think Arab is? Is it just a language group? Is it an ethnic group, or people that are predominantly Muslim? What's your view on that?
That's a hard question, because I always class myself as African.
Mm-hmm.
every time somebody classes me as Arab, I always correct them and say I'm African. But there's nothing wrong with being Arab. It's just I don't know. I just class myself as African.
Do you feel
I don't know.
You have more in common with a Ghanaian than you do with a Saudi, for example?
Yeah, but I think that's just me. I don't think that's representative of
But that's
Morocco.
a good example, because it's a good example of the way you put it, because say person A in Morocco, is he more does he have more in common with someone in Ghana or with Saudi Arabia? The point is, you're assuming that people in Ghana are on the list and the people in Saudi Arabia are on the list. But we know in Saudi Arabia,
exactly,
you have Persians, you have all different types. It's a melting pot. Yeah. But then they're all considered Saudi Arabian. Obviously, that's the whole title from the citizens of you even have Yemenis. You have, you know what I'm saying? So
yes, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Oh, can I ask you?
Wait, sorry, is it carry on? Sorry.
So then, the person in Morocco would have more in common with the Saudis because they both speak Arabic, right? But obviously, they share the same continent as the Ghanaian. So they're geographically more closer and have more in common with a Ghanaian, but linguistically, they're part of perhaps a shared group that a Saudi Arabian would be involved in as well. But that wouldn't be an ethnic designation. You can't say someone in Morocco shares the same ethnicity as someone in Saudi Arabia because they're both quote unquote Arab.
Yeah.
I might as well just say it here. I think Arab is a linguistic designation.
You think it's linguistic? So do you identify as Arab as well, Syria?
Yeah, in that sense, of course. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a cultural element to Arabness as well?
I think
how? Because look at how varied the expression of Arab quote unquote culture is. There might be similarities, sure, but that has to do with the underlying culture, like Phoenician culture or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Mediterranean culture, in terms of like food, shared foods and such. But in terms of expressions of what it means to be quote unquote Arab, it's as varied as expressions of what it means to be African on the continent, or what expressions of what it means to be Amazonian. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's going to be like overlap here and there, but for the most part, it's going to be distinct and regional.
Oz, can I just say something? Because this is really interesting how this conversation has evolved. I think it's very natural how it evolved from colonialism to how do you even define concepts of ethnicity. And just to go back to something you said before, just to clarify, I'm sure I misheard you, but almost for a minute to conflate ethnicity with race, and that you were talking about the Berbers and things like this when I just wanted to be clear that race is a BS construct, in that when I talk about race, I'm not talking about ethnicity at all. Like when I say people talk about white, brown, black, right? Like I'm not saying that the racism that results from these concepts isn't real or that people didn't think that way, but on a scientific level, they are nonsensical constructs. Because someone could say that a Greek, let's say, right, was white, but that a Turk was brown, like in some kind of Oriental framework or Orientalist framework. But ethnically speaking, and just empirically, like if you look at a Greek and look at a Turk, like a Greek would have more in common with a Turk than with a Scandinavian, right? Even though they might be classed as white, both be classed.
True. I think because we arbitrarily define things. This comes back to my point about Orientalism. When a lot of the people so obviously people that discover different things are from different areas, but obviously we hear more about European discoverers and inventors because of the nature of the balance of power today, right? And these people categorize things according to their own biases arbitrarily. So they would say that Greek people fall into the category of white Europeans, right? When actually, like you said, if you look at it, Greeks, Bulgarians, Balkan countries, they probably have similar ethnic ties to Turkey or to maybe even Iran or the Caucasus, right? So you can't just superimpose the definition like they did with Hinduism, for example, trying to make it into a religious paradigm and say this is a polytheist religion when it's actually more deeper than that. But I wanted to go back to the point about this was what we found. So the geneticists found that Moroccans that identify as Arabs and Moroccans that identify as Amazigh share near identical Arab Amazigh blood. So this is the peer-reviewed paper. I can send this to those that request it, that basically states that basically everyone in Morocco shares near identical blood, and their blood is related to Iberians, so Spanish people, and the Amazigh. So it's another arbitrary definition, like you're an Amazigh, you're an Arab. It's kind of arbitrary, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And who the hell's Spanish? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. Spanish
is
yeah.
Yeah.
So Emel, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Do you like identify with the Amazigh as a Libyan?
Personally, no. I know a lot of friends who do, but I don't. I would identify more as Arab, just because the way I was brought up as well. Like, I never went to Libyan school. I always went to like Arabic schools as well, and I didn't really see a difference, like a drastic difference in culture with me and like my classmates.
What about Mediterranean? Do you see yourself as a Mediterranean person more than an Arab person? Like, do you think you have more in common with an Italian person than you do with a Yemeni, for example?
No, I'd say I'd have more in common with the Yemeni person.
Fine. Okay, fine.
Well, Oz, what, just out of curiosity, why do you, I don't know, why do you pose the question in that way? Because I always find it fascinating, just to share a quick fact with you guys, that they say that there is more genetic diversity within Africa than there is in the entire human race. Like, if you compare Africa to if let's say the gene pool of the human race was a pizza, like 7 or out of those 8 slices of pizza would just be the genetic diversity in Africa because of the history of human species in that continent.
Where did you get that?
It's fascinating. You can look it up. I promise you. And on another note, the ethnicities are defined partly by things like religion, by language, but ethnic groups, you could say, themselves are defined by land and the migration of peoples from one land to another, and like the movement of those peoples, like social movements, and because of that, if you make that connection, there's actually less ethnic diversity between any 2 human beings on Earth than there is between. You could have a troop of, they've done this, like if you take a group of a higher primate, like
you're right, by the way. Carry on.
If you take a group of chimpanzees in one forest and a group of chimpanzees in a neighboring forest, there could be more genetic diversity between those 2 troops of chimpanzees than between any 2 human beings on Earth, because the human species has migrated so much. Like, we are travelers, like inherently travelers. I just think this ethnic essentialism that Azaria alluded to earlier, I just don't see where it gets us. Like, we need to resist colonialism in terms of its institutions and the prejudices that it inculcates, even if those prejudices are based on complete pseudoscience, because scientifically, ethnicity is such a fluid concept, and race isn't a concept at all. It's utter nonsense.
Wait, so what's your distinction between ethnicity and race? I don't get it.
That race is completely fictional. That's just one thing.
No, but what is the difference between the 2?
Ethnicity is about, I'm not an ethicist, that's the word, but there is a word for that, but I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. But when they try to define ethnicities, my very basic understanding is that they take some kind of common denominators, and I think this would apply to the Arabs, and they would say the movement of the Arabs, like, they seem to stem geographically from a shared geographical area to an extent, and that they have a common root in Arabia, right, geographically, and there is a shared language that they share Arabic, and there is a religious or ideological commonality in the form of Islam with the Arab people. But yeah,
fine. So basically, I agree that race and that ethnicity is very fluid. So, for example, have you seen these Hebrew Israelites in Speaker's Corner and whatever? Yeah. So they claim that they're the original Israelites, they're the original Jew or whatever it is, and that. But what I don't understand about their argument is that if the same people, the same Black civil rights people that tend to have these opinions as well, correctly claim that all humanity started with Africa anyway. So there is no distinction then. So how can you say that you're a special chosen person and then at the same time say we're all connected? Then we're all special chosen people, So
a lot of people say they're a bit of a cult, aren't they? And
but it doesn't make sense. But yeah, I agree that it's
then Judaism is a cult.
Well, what religions? If you're going to talk about that, you can say which religions are. I mean, I think religions start off.
No, I mean the dismissive like tone in your voice about them and criticizing them for their chosenness. Yeah, what I'm saying is that's inherent. That's inherent in rabbinic Judaism, which is the most predominant form of Judaism today.
The kind of people. Sorry, you're right. I should clarify. It might have been quite offensive. I don't think that their way of thinking is inherently cultish. I think that the people that Oz was referring to specifically are the ones that take this very kind of exclusivist, kind of either theological or kind of racial outlook, maybe. I think that they would be displaying kind of cultish behaviors, but there is some truth to it in the sense that theologically, the people like the Ethiopian Jews and the people who maybe take inspiration from that, who identify as Hebrew Israelites, talk about the story of Sheba, right? Like there's a very famous, the Jewish people had a very famous connection to the people of East Africa. And my historical knowledge there is a bit patchy, but you might want to fill me in, fill in the gaps here, Zaria Boaz, if you know about this. But the Jewish people had some links with the with the royal certain monarchies from that region, and that's where they get it from.
Fine. Okay. So I think we should park that for now and stick to the conversation about colonialism. But it's an interesting point about the links between the Jewish people and the monarchy. But yeah, we'll come back to this. So I wanted to, Emma, if you're still there, because obviously I was explaining what Orientalism is. So this is an example of an Orientalist painter-traveler painting, where if you look at the painting, and so this is very typical. If you look at colonial paintings of North Africa and the Middle East from the French particularly, but also British travelers, they place the people as almost objects, animate or inanimate objects that are part of the atmosphere. They're completely like dehumanized. They're just there because they look pretty, or they look like they're adding mysticism to the environment. And this mentality has gone into like popular culture. Even today, it stays with us. So for example, if you look at, the new Aladdin movie with Will Smith or something, yeah?
Yeah, I want to bring that up as an example.
Yeah, this is most things that involve Arab culture is all kind of mystical and tedious and kind of wishy-washy, not very serious, and just part of a storytelling narrative. And most women in Arab culture, in books or films or movies that portray Arab culture, are just there waiting for a man to emancipate her. So like if you look at, if you read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, it's the same thing, very popular book, but essentially what it comes down to is about some mystical shepherd boy in Morocco traveling to Mecca to find his destiny and all this cliched BS. And then he meets this woman and like kind of gives her a purpose in life. It's just a typical Orientalist colonial attitude that is projected into current culture.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like Jasmine, because she's like the only person that's like different and picking up, and she's like, I won't be silent, like suggesting everyone else is just like a silent, like every other woman silently listening.
Exactly. And they're forgetting the fact that, like we looked at yesterday in Tunisia, one country that the woman can give the surname to her child, which you can't even do in Britain, yeah? Or for example, they're forgetting the fact that Khadija was the wife of the Prophet, was a very, very powerful individual, very influential individual. The women in Arab society aren't these submissive, sexualized, inanimate objects that are just there to make good poetry in the English, like in Waterstones and W.H. Smiths. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a bit BS.
But can you blame the Europeans for not knowing that, when I think even a lot of Muslims forget that Khadija, she was the Prophet's boss, 15 years his senior. I believe she asked him to marry her. Like, it's very, very
a lot of people bring that up. I don't know. Maybe it's just the Arabs I know, but a lot of them bring it up and praise Khadija.
Yeah, well, that's very lucky because I mean, my wife.
They're right to bring it up.
Yeah, they are right to bring it up because my wife says that one of the most powerful things she could do to kind of assuage some people's concerns about our marriage was to bring up the story of Khadija, because she heard it from a lot of people. Obviously, are you sure you know what you're doing marrying this quote unquote Gora, because he's 15 years your junior, blah blah blah. And then But as soon as she brought up the story of Hadija, and yeah, I mean, that story had a power for her, so maybe I was just assuming it would for other people too. But I was just to get back to your main point here. I think it's very interesting how this Orientalist view of women has merged so neatly, or segued so neatly, into kind of the war on terror, and that is the narratives that it has constructed about women, because you see it still today, don't you, really, like very, very clearly, that you see women either as these kind of submissive, repressed people under this kind of Islamic misogynistic framework, or they themselves are the extremists. Like either they themselves are the religious extremists, or they are subdued by them. Like it's very binary. Do you guys see that as well?
Yeah, so can you elaborate more before I answer? Can you just elaborate a bit more on that?
No, nothing, just echoing what you said. I was just basically repeating what you said, but trying to get...
The thing is, okay, fine. The thing is, yeah, some people actually like that definition, that Orientalist definition of themselves. So if you look at the kind of ISIS women fighters that went to Syria to join their husbands or whatever, they kind of like this whole romantic idea of being this submissive wife and going to a war zone and her husband coming back with a bit of steak and slapping it on the table. Like, do you know what I mean? But the thing is, it completely undermines our own like sense of our own movement to empower and emancipate ourselves as people from post-colonial countries. It's a completely counterintuitive point. And I don't think that Arabs were like that in the Prophet's time. I don't think Arab women were totally submissive. If you look at hadith, you look at narratives from the time, they played a key part in society. I mean, look at the story of Hind, you know, taking somebody she disagreed with, killing them and eating their liver, you know, to make a point out of it. These were powerful women that were setting examples for certain things. They weren't just laying around the house or laying on the couch, you know. It's a bit weird that our own people kind of like to have that imagination of themselves, but this might be an evolutionary thing. Maybe, I don't know, maybe...
Isn't that the prominent theme of anti-colonialism they wrote, like this idea that people, that an idea can be like a virus, like you can remove the, you know, it's such a cliche that ideas, you can't kill an idea, it has so much power, blah, 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 but that's the romantic and positive way of looking at it, but it's also the negative way of looking at it in the sense that you can remove the colonial institutions and the colonizer himself even,
of course,
but the ideas that they spread, once they get into people's minds, like it can take generations to undo that kind of damage.
Exactly. And the ideas they spread, for example, the picture I put up now, if you look at the way that British painters paint themselves, very orderly, very functional, very symmetrical, suit, tie, all of this stuff, and you contrast it with their portrayal of Arabs, which is like lounging around, doing nothing, women just dancing in the middle of a hammam somewhere, you know, that kind of thing. It does, these things add up. And you do, even as a child, I had a mystical view of my own country growing up, because I was raised with all of these like bullshit stories like Aladdin and flipping, what else, you know, Sinbad the Sailor and all this crap. And then you're a 5-year-old and you go back home and stuff, and you see that world in that kind of way. And
did you notice with Aladdin that they I think very intentionally, I mean, I have no evidence of this, but I bet you it was intentional on the part of Disney to place Aladdin in pre-Islamic Arabia. You hear about this? Like it's situated in pre-Islamic Arabia, apparently.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
it's in Baghdad, isn't it? Set in Baghdad, yeah.
No, Agrabah is like Agrabah, isn't it? It's supposed to be some made-up city, but it's supposed to. I think you're right. Probably Persia or the Mesopotamia, but they situated it in, or actually, I think Arabia. Like, but it's intentionally vague and vague, but not vague enough as to. The Disney producers were quite clear about that. It was situated in pre-Islamic. You might want to check me on that, but
fine, I'll check. Yeah, I'll check it out. But Ziryab, I just wanted to make a point. When you look at a lot of these Orientalist paintings, you see that there are Black people captured as Arabs. So not necessarily. Sometimes they capture them as slaves, but sometimes, like here, for example, they're just part of the kind of decor. They are also Arabs. So I think your point is right about it not just necessarily being an ethnicity, but also a kind of ethno-cultural group as well.
Well, again, it depends on how you define ethnicity. This idea of an essential race or an essential ethnicity, as in something that's unchanging from Moses all the way down to Einstein, in the example of like the Jewish example, I think it's laughable. But the I've just found a paper that I'm going to post into the chat, and it's entitled, it's up to an academic paper. It says, localizing Ashkenazi Jews to primeval villages in the ancient Iranian lands of Ashkenaz. I'm literally just posting it in the chat right now, but the takeaway is this, and this is why I mention it. The takeaway is that an analysis of 393 Ashkenazic, Iranian, and Mountain Jews and over 600 non-Jewish genomes demonstrated that Greeks, Romans, Iranians, and Turks exhibit the highest genetic similarity with Ashkenazic Jews. So, like I said, I'm just posting in the chat now. So the idea of an essential ethnicity, I think, is fundamentally problematic. I view ethnicity more to do with like a looser definition of a shared, as you said, like the cultural definition, so a shared language, perhaps, or shared rules, cultural rules, and of that nature. So when it comes to the variant or the kind of makeup of the army of Tariq ibn Zayd, you'll notice in a lot of those drawings from that period, there's going to be a range of quote unquote colors. So it's the thing. I don't think Arab has ever been a static kind of essential race as such. More to do with a culture of shared norms, values, language, and so on. And that's what's going on, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Yeah. And I'm looking at your article as well. And then you wanted to make a point as well?
Yeah, I was just talking before about like the representation of Muslim women, like in the media is absolutely awful. Like genuinely, they either blow themselves up or like they completely abandon their morals and stuff. And like when it's a Muslim woman, like say if it was anyone else, the whole plot wouldn't be about their religion. But then when there's a Muslim woman in any show, like she's completely like just consumed by her religion. She's not got any other personality or like anything else to her.
Yeah.
It's like you can't be a normal.
Or she gets wooed by a white boy.
Exactly, and give everything up. Like no one does that in real life.
What's wrong with that?
I know.
Oh, yeah,
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to also mention, although Dina Tokyo, I can't back her on anything else, but she did make a point. She mentioned how women are always, like Muslim women are always breaking a stereotype, and it's like, how long are we going to break the stereotype? And like, it's like everything that a Muslim woman does, she does it, and it's like, wow, look at this amazing Muslim woman. She's gone beyond, what she was supposed to be as just like a housewife. Do you know what I mean? And she's actually doing something with her life. And it's
honestly,
just,
like
it's
so
like,
true.
Yeah.
And you
can't
there's
just
nothing wrong with it, by the way, Sean. It was just that the way they presented them is that they have to give up where they come from in order to get the white right.
Oh right, yeah. No, I was just kidding, man. I was just playing with you. But saying though, can I quickly come back to the Ashkenazi point because it's very interesting. That's why I'm very careful to focus on the tribe element, because ethnically speaking, you're right, it's a very fluid concept to the extent that that actually most of the Jews in Israel even are of, specifically in Israel, are more Arab origin than European origin. Like there are a majority of Jews in Israel, I believe, are so actually majority of Israel, and this is really interesting, is already Arab, in that 20% of Israel is Arab, and then the remaining 80% that are Jewish, and more of those Jews are of Arab origin, like from Morocco and Iraq and so on, than of European origin, which I think is interesting. But that shows you, doesn't it, that it's more about the tribe, in that it's an ideology. Like a tribe, I think it's kind of an inherited ideology. Like I don't want to diminish the Aborigines or the Sioux or the Apache, for example, like in the US, in the sense that you have maybe a common belief system, but to make what makes that a tribe, I'm not sure, is that if you say that that is inherited, or that set of values is automatically or by default in some way inherited from your parents. Like in the case of the Jewish tribe, they say that if a child has a Jewish mother, that they are raised in the kind of the Jewish ways and the Jewish practice, and which is why the line sometimes between religion and tribe can be quite thin. But I don't know. But it's a bit of a tangent. I don't want to go too far into that because tribe is a very interesting concept. But sorry, Os.
Okay, I just want to establish, belly dancing, did this come before colonialism or is this afterwards?
What's that, sorry?
Belly dancing.
Belly dancing, oh, right. I'm not an expert in belly dancing.
Because I think the point I'm making is that we continue to objectify ourselves. Like a lot of our women and ourselves, we talk about, like, we push back against colonial attitudes towards us, but then we still have shisha cafes in like cliche tourist zones in Cairo where there are belly dancers. That kind of, it's like we can't really complain about it and then do the thing that we're complaining about, which is like orientalizing ourselves,
Yeah.
Touching on what you wrote in the chat.
Say that again, sorry.
I was just gonna say, you know how you said that Muslim women are more into Instagram and stuff like that. I don't really necessarily think that's true. Maybe they stick out more because
they're
they're
more noticeable.
Yeah.
Okay, so what?
But I was gonna say, I think maybe it's just because they kind of use the idea that they are a Muslim as like a way to propel themselves, almost. You know what I mean?
You might as well
Identity politics 101. This is the point.
It's like identity politics. Yeah, like if you go back to the start of social media, like start of YouTube almost, and look at like Lily Singh and like FusiTube and whatever, they were always like pushing this idea, just a brown kid, you know what I mean, like Liza Koshy, whatever, all these like American YouTubers, they really pushed this idea, but I think they mostly use that to just propel their career.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry, Ziria.
No, just I agree.
I always loved Oz. You know who one of my favorite musicians as a teen, well, still now actually, from quote unquote hip hop / rap genre is Akala, and he talks about that a lot, like people selling out their culture for other people's profit, right? Like he said, he was talking more, I think, about people of African origin in that song, but he was saying that people essentialize themselves sometimes for very base reasons because they think it's what sells, right? Like just adding to what you said.
Yeah. No, I agree. But my point about Instagram wasn't that most Muslim women use it. It was that from the Instagram, from the vlogger types that I see on YouTube and Instagram and stuff, from that pool, the majority of them seem to be like young Muslim women or whatever. But that could just be my exposure because maybe I'm getting recommendations based on my identity. I don't know, like based on being an Arab. Do you know what I mean? But
is that a bad thing? Like, I don't understand like where you're going with that.
Fine. I think it is a bad thing. I'll be frank about it. I think it's
I'm not going to agree. I'm not going to lie, Sam. I kind of agree. Like, I'm not going to say it's like a great thing to be putting yourself out there, whatever. But then again, like, I don't know. It's
but why not? Why not? I'm gonna jump on the other side. I'm gonna jump in on our side of the debate.
I don't know. I just say it's like part of. I don't know. I'm not like a scholar. I don't want to talk too much on. Like,
if it's done properly, in the sense. Of, I mean, I understand if people do it to kind of, to do the whole hijab reveal kind of madness. But if they're doing it for the sake of, say, giving their perspective, their insight, like their point of view, I don't see why they can't.
Yeah, no, definitely. There are a lot of like Muslim bloggers and vloggers and whatever that I do support, but I've just seen so many Muslims who just go into this like path of becoming this like Instagram star, and then it just doesn't lead to anything good. Like if you just take Dina Tokyo as an example, she got to a good point in her career and then took her hijab off, and just so many kind of go down the wrong path. And I just, what did you say?
I think she definitely, like, no one says, take off your hijab and you take it off. I think if she thought about taking off her hijab, then that was definitely a battle that she had beforehand. And I think it's unfair to criticize Muslim women that are like YouTube.
Yeah, definitely. If you're going to only criticize Muslim women, then that is
There's a reason, though. I criticize.
I'm going to say that you're criticizing not because they're visible Muslim women, but because you believe that they sometimes essentialize. Yeah, I agree with them to the extent.
No. That's not why I criticize it.
Why are you criticizing?
I criticize it because they share my identity and I care about that narrative more as a Muslim.
I don't understand.
It's my bias.
Go after like Muslim men though, because I swear half of the like Muslim YouTubers and stuff, they'll have like because hijab's for men.
I go after Muslim men, like they completely sell themselves out for clout and just for
I agree. I agree.
And then people attack Muslim women.
I agree with you. I agree. And I think we can do so. The reason I object to this whole, I get the whole thing about like saying your side of the story and perhaps using the platform for greater good. And maybe, I guess I'm quite sympathetic of that. But generally speaking, I disagree with this whole Instagram culture because you're still putting yourself in a situation where you're allowing your value to be determined by your viewer. So you're still objectifying yourself.
But Oz, can I back them up here? Because I think what they were alluding to is a lot of these men they're supposed to be in the job as well, and they're like total meatheads, man. Like they're gym bros, you know. They're going there and looking at how many reps I can do, and they're like in their tank tops or whatever. And it's totally non-hijab, and they're let off the hook completely. Like it always blew my mind, man. Like it's
you're right. We do focus on women more. I agree, but I guess for me, it's more the fact that it's more that I care more about this topic. I'm not saying it's more important or worse situation. It's that this is my battle. You know, everyone has their own battle. My battle is whole Arab empowerment. That's my battle. Yeah, so that's the zone that I'm focused on. So that's why I've got a gripe with this. But I guess if I was a white guy called John and I had my own...
Maybe give us an example then of like an Arab influencer who's walking away from Arab empowerment.
Fine, I'll give you an example. Dina Tokyo is a good example, right? She, in the beginning, I actually was kind of like really pissed off with her because she got into fame, she did the whole hijab thing, whatever. And then when people made questions or comments about Islam, she would say, oh, no, I don't represent Islam. I'm not an Islamic. And it's like, hang on a second. You do represent Islam. That is the reason why you're so famous now. You're famous because you're a hijabi vlogger. So now you do have a responsibility to kind of bear that into consideration and perhaps answer some questions about that. You can't just pick and choose.
I don't think it's fair to attribute all of her fame to Islam because she had lots of non-Muslim followers as well. And that's the thing that I was talking about.
I'm not attributing all of her fame. I'm attributing some of it.
I don't think she is a representation. I think as a Muslim, being a Muslim is an important part of your identity, but it's not everything. And some people say you wanted to do a channel about makeup and someone asked you a question about gaming, even though you were a gamer as well. You'd be perfectly fine not to answer that question.
I agree that it's not all about the fact that she was a hijabi, but I think the hijab thing was a significant part of it because it was all about
okay, but how does any of this feed into colonialism?
Because it's the continued objectification, which is part of the colonial narrative.
But Oz, I think you're buying into the colonial narrative a little bit yourself here in a sense. I mean, I don't want to be too inflammatory, but I'm just saying that I think it's very dangerous to go down this path of you're saying that, and we hear it a lot from some people, I'll give you that, but that every visible Muslim woman in terms of a woman who wears hijab is somehow automatically like an alima or like an ambassador for when a man, like you're saying that she is, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that's your argument, but it's kind of what you're implying. And like, why is a Muslim man, let's say, who has like this beard from like this big, like, why is he not like ambassador for his faith? And,
fine. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, and also if a Muslim woman gets up there and she happens to wear hijab and she wants to make a blog about Star Wars, like, I love Star Wars, let's talk about Star Wars all day. Like, why is her following have to add to her Muslim identity?
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Sometimes. And especially for Muslim women, because like they're like the biggest people who get like hate crime and stuff like that, and it's not fair to put everything on them all the time just because you can see like obviously that we're Muslims clearly.
Yeah, no, Emma, you make a good point. I guess that you're right. The fact that Muslims are visibly identifiable, i.e. they tend to have a different complexion if they're from a Middle Eastern country or they wear a hijab, in a way that I would say that maybe we don't notice Jewish Instagrammers or Jewish vloggers because they assimilate and they're not...
because they have a stage name.
Sorry?
Because they have a non-Jewish sounding stage name.
Possibly, or because they're white, to be frank, they're white. So you can't distinguish them from other European bloggers.
Some are visible, like you have Jewish people wear a kippah, or you have Sikhs, like Sikh people who, but I don't think you could apply that logic to them either. If you had a Sikh guy with the turban on, and like, why is he automatically held?
Okay, wait, hang on. Let's deal with the issue one by one, because I don't want my views to be misrepresented. are we ambassadors for the ideologies that we subscribe to? To some extent, yes, not completely. When your thing, what you're doing, is largely the result of a particular ideology you subscribe to, then you are an ambassador for that ideology. So if you become famous as a vlogger, as a hijabi vlogger, then you are now an ambassador for hijab.
It depends.
That's my opinion.
It
Yeah, it
depends.
depends how you advertise yourself.
Exactly. If they're branded,
Exactly, it depends how you advertise yourself. I agree.
Modest makeup, we're trying to show you how to do makeup that accentuates your eyes because you're wearing hijab or whatever. Like if they place that emphasis on themselves, then fine, you know, I can see your point. But if they just want to, as I go back to my earlier analogy, they just want to talk about video games or Star Wars or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, there's like, I think there's 2 points. It's like, as the wider, just like internet community, whatever, you know, it depends how you advertise yourself to them. But then also within the Muslim community, it's like how unfairly women are, like how Muslim women are asked to constantly represent their faith versus how Muslim men are, like, they just, no one cares what they do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
you're
if
right.
you were to, and this isn't even just on the internet, this is just all the time. Like if you were to go into a club, no one would bat an eyelid. Do you know what I mean? But if, not that it's okay, obviously, but if I was to go into, then that's like a complete different story.
Yeah, you're right. You have a lot more pressure than we do. I 100% agree. And you know, it's true, because even though, okay, my name is obviously clearly Muslim, Osama, right? But visibly, I'm not identified. Like some people don't even realize I'm Arab. You know, some people just think I'm mixed race or whatever, Portuguese or Mexican, whatever, right? So I've had a very normal, when I was at university or after, I had a very normal life. I could go to a club, come out, I'd just live like anyone else. But if I was a Muslim woman wearing a hijab, then it's another story. I'm identifiable now. You know, I can't just fly under the radar.
From both sides sometimes, like you'll get Muslims criticizing you, and then you've obviously got like loads of racists criticizing you as well. And I think that's one of the things that led Dina to take off hijab as well, because it was coming from both sides, and I think she had struggles beforehand as well.
Do you agree with her taking off the hijab to kind of deal with it? You don't need to answer if you don't want to, but yeah.
The reason,
I mean, if she was wearing it and in her heart she believed it was wrong, then she wouldn't be getting like Allah wouldn't have recognized that anyway. So
the reason I stopped. Sorry, Emma, I keep cutting you off.
No, Hannah, you go on.
Okay. The reason I like stopped supporting Dina wasn't necessarily because she took a hijab off, because whatever, you know, like if that's like if you're struggling with that, then that's fine. I'm not gonna, you know, hate on you for that. But my big thing was just how she dealt with the situation and like certain things that she was saying, like leading up to it. Like I remember, if you remember when there was that letter sent around about like Hate Muslims Day or something like that. I can't remember. She was like, oh, yeah. She was like, oh, maybe you should wear a beanie instead of a hijab. Or when she took the hijab off, she was like, sometimes I just wanted to go to, I can't remember exactly what she said, but she was like, oh, I just want to blend in sometimes and whatever. And it's like, when you have that type of I guess I'm unfairly judging her now, but when you have that kind of platform, and especially like young Muslim girls, you have to be more careful with your choice of words. So I just stopped supporting her in general.
It is difficult to put someone on a pedestal, I know what you mean, but I personally stopped supporting her because of what her husband was saying, some really dodgy things about Muslim women as well. But I don't know, I couldn't really judge her for taking off her hijab because, like,
yeah, no,
I know it's a difficult one though, because I know what you mean.
Maybe we can zoom out.
Yeah.
Finish your point. So my bad. Go
on. No, sorry. I can't remember what I was saying. Yeah, you can't put her on a pedestal. She's like, you can't. She's only a human at the end of the day. She's not a prophet. She's not anyone important. You can't treat everyone like follow her. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I was just quickly.
Yeah, I was just saying maybe we can zoom out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I was intending to do that actually. So I hope
Fine. Yeah, we can do. And perhaps if we try to wrap up at either 1 or 1:15, so either between 10 and 25 minutes. Yeah. But yeah, let's zoom out. Sean, so
zoom out was going to just tie into your experience. You were saying how people thought you were Mexican, and it just kind of shows the it's a real buzzword, but the intersectionality of it, in the sense that there's, for Muslim women, there's so many angles coming into it. It's their perceived race, their religion, their gender, like the way that, again, like if you aren't wearing a visible Muslim symbol, then people are more likely to identify you with a race other than Arab, because Arabs are kind of equated with Islam a lot of the time, even though, like, famously only 20% of Muslims are Arab or something, right? And that with Muslim women, there is of course that extra scrutiny. Like, again, my wife, when she was really young, like in her teens, she said she went all the way to like Birmingham or something, where she had some doubts about her faith, and she went through her own journey, right? But she was going clubbing and doing all this stuff. She was really into her trance music, and the people, there was like this random uncle, I kid you not, like she got picked up in this taxi, and she was wearing like this black outfit, and she was like, really not playing the Muslim persona, shall we say, the Muslim role. And this guy, he knew her, and he was like, and somehow, I don't know the word for it, but there's like that saying, like the auntie line, or like it got back to her family, or got back to like a friend of the family, and they heard about it. And like, I feel like if a Muslim guy had done that, like if the uncle had recognized him, I bet you wouldn't give him two hoots about it. Like, but if it was
they all snitch on you.
But do you know why they say that? I don't agree with the justification, but the reason what they say, I talk to my wife about this sometimes, because then sometimes she's held to a different standard to her brother. And the argument that they often give is that, no, the power dynamic makes it different because I can't protect myself from a man, but a man can protect himself from a woman. That's the kind of
I'd question that, right?
Yeah, I did question.
It's definitely got a clause into me a few times. That is complete nonsense, but anyway, carry on.
Yeah, but zooming out, the reason I mentioned this whole Instagram thing is because, so to make the links here very clear, right? The reason why objectification of women or men, Arab women or Arab men, feeds into colonialism is because you can justify colonialism on the basis of our inadequacy. So if people view us as inanimate objects, as as just whatever, like empty vessels, then it's easier for a country to invade another country. When people die, they're just numbers. You don't really relate to it. When Madeleine McCann goes missing and she's blonde hair, blue eyes, and looks like your child or looks like the person in the mirror, there's an emotional resonation. But when 4,000 Iraqis die in a day, it's just 4,000 Iraqis, because we're dehumanized and we're objectified. And I was just thinking about how this whole Instagram thing feeds into that.
Well, this feeds into the military-industrial complex as well, and imperialism and class, and I want to bring it to that too, because even Stalin said that one death is a murder or a tragedy. I'm trying to remember the exact. It was something like one death is a murder, but like 100,000 is a statistic, or a million is a statistic.
Exactly.
And I'm paraphrasing heavily there, but it's people are seen as there is a ruling class, whether it be defined by, it's very intersectional, it can be defined by class, religion, ethnicity. But the fundamental point is that when you have this institutionalized ruling class, everyone else by definition is a little bit dehumanized and is a little bit less worthwhile. That's just an abstract point.
But is that not just because of where we live?
What's that, sorry?
You go ahead, Zoe.
No, go ahead. It's okay. Go on.
Is that not just because of where we live? Maybe not that I disagree. Sorry. But it's like, I mean, I guess it's not justifiable, but it makes sense that if they're far away from you, then you don't care. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. The less things you have in common with them, then the less you can relate to them. But that's just about being a good person. To go back to your earlier point, I was about people being ambassadors for their faith or whatever. I think that's just about being a good person. Just being able to sympathize with people far away. It's just being a good person. Being able to represent yourself and not be seen visibly as being like a hypocrite. Like, it's just being a good person. And we need to not place any more emphasis. Like, we all have an equal responsibility to God at the end of the day, right? And we all have to say, like, I wasn't, in terms of the values I espoused and the visibly even, that I wasn't a hypocrite. Right, like, and this is all comes down to quite just basic moral points. I think some of it.
Yeah, obviously, but I'm just saying, as in, say, if I lived in Libya, and 100,000 people died in the UK, would I care as much?
Well, are you saying should you or would you? Like, I mean,
should we? We all obviously should care about other people, but
Yeah. I think we could. I think people realistically don't, because we're flawed. We're humans. Like the only thing that's perfect at the end of the day, right, is Alice Montana, right? But we are flawed, and we have our very specific situation in time and place, and it is a responsibility of a believer, I think, or a philosopher, to be able to. I mean, because I think very highly of philosophers. Maybe it's a little bit self-serving, but I think that the essence of being a philosopher anyway is to try and transcend your I mean, this is quite Greek, admittedly, maybe it's a quite very Greek outlook, but they believe that the best idea they had about what it meant to be a philosopher is to transcend your kind of biases, or whether they be very physical or instinctive or cultural, your specific location in time and space, to try and see things from a higher perspective, to be able to relate with people who are different from you. Because if we just live by instinct and our specific circumstances in life, by the sheer chance of where we were born, then are we really that different from like a non-sentient being? Like,
what was Aristotle's view on slavery again?
Well, that's why I said
he supports it.
So the point I'm getting at is people don't just die. Like, you don't just have Iraqis dying. What you have is genocide, and I think this is what is linked with colonialization and project of colonialization. We often use these euphemisms like colonization and talk about perhaps less prickly topics, because the aspect of genocide is the one that stares us in the face. The reality is that genocide, we're almost complacent hostages of history, in that we look backwards when it comes to genocide, whether it was the German Kaiser and his genocide of the Namibian people, or the later genocide of the Armenian genocide in Anatolian Turkey, Ottoman Turkey, or of course the genocide committed by the Nazis. What I'm saying is that genocide, I feel as though colonialism is a euphemism, colonization is a euphemism for genocide, because genocide, I think you'd all agree, has two stages. One is destroying the pattern of a people, the pattern that they are accustomed to, and the other is the imposition. So that's what we've been talking about, cultural imperialism, the imposition of the pattern of the colonizer upon the people. Right now, the point is if we have that as a working definition, although kind of pretty loose, but as a working definition, then what we would be faced with is that colonization is not something that's in the past, or genocide is not something in the past. It's an ongoing project. It continues until this day, and we need only look at the expulsion of the Palestinians for a recent example of that.
Yeah, it's a very good point. That you can't forget that some of these processes are ongoing. There's all these genocides or ethnic cleansings or ethnic displacements around the world that are ongoing, and we can't forget that. But I think Oz is right to use the word colonization, though, just to defend him, in that colonization goes beyond ethnic cleansing and displacement, in that there's a cultural imperialism that you refer to. I mean, I'm not saying you dispute at that point, sorry, I just think colonialism and genocide aren't interchangeable. Or maybe your point is that genocide is the most important aspect of it, and that the fact that it's ongoing is the more important aspect. Was that your point?
No, the point I was making is I feel as though colonialization or colonization is a euphemism for the project of genocide, and what we've been discussing is one aspect of genocide, that cultural imposition, the cultural imperialism that occurs secondarily after the displacement of a people's pattern, right? After the displacement of a people's pattern, and then the imposition of the colonizer's pattern, national pattern, and cultural imperialism. These two work hand in hand. And what I'm saying is the destruction or the killing of a people is basically secondary to the point, to these two major points, which is the destruction of the national pattern of a people, and then the imposition of a foreign national pattern from the oppressor upon the oppressed.
That's a very good point. I think what you're saying is that we are almost glorifying the oppressor by focusing on their expansion and their influence, when by definition, one person's expansion is another person's loss. Like, part of maybe a coherent anti-colonialism is to spend as much time talking about that which was lost, or those people who are losing their culture or their heritage in some way or another. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but you can't. Yeah, but in order to have that conversation, I think Ziriab's right. You need to be very careful about terminology. So I oversaw that, admittedly, because you got to remember, colonizers called themselves colonizers. Literally, the British said that they referred to their projects as the British colonial project. So if they're happy to use the word themselves, then we need to question why, right? And I think perhaps, like Aziriab said, the word colonize is something that ants do when they just occupy a bit of your house, right? So it's kind of like it's a soft word for what is essentially ethnic cleansing and rewriting your entire culture. Like it's when they refer to protectorates, like in Morocco's case, Morocco was a protectorate. Apparently we were being protected by somebody, which is just a bullshit term for an occupation, right? So yeah, I think we do need to watch our language with this. With Hannah made the point about
the victors write history, right? Like that's the cliche. That we have to also look at some things through their lens because they were the ones that were left, right? Like by definition, the things that they destroyed completely, or the people, the culture that they were able to destroy completely, weren't able to write their own narrative, or we could only see things through the lens of the oppressor.
True, but we haven't been clever. Okay, I'll get to this bit in a second. Yeah, Hannah said about would she care as much as a Libyan if British people died as if Libyan people died? I agree with what she's implying, that she wouldn't care as much as if it was her own person.
Like, as in, is that like a criticism of Westerners, or is that just just like a part of humanity almost? You know what I mean? That you just don't care about people who are far away from you.
Exactly. But yes, so I believe it's a human thing. We care about people that resonate with us dying. So when you hear someone passing away and they're your age, then it shocks you, for example. However, you still care more. The Libyan viewing a Westerner die still cares more than the Westerner viewing a Middle Easterner die.
That's true. Yeah.
For example, 9/11. Yeah, that still shocks all of us when we see the footage or whatever. But how many 9/11s happen every day in Iraq? How many multi-story buildings completely collapse and thousands of people die? And it doesn't really, like, both of those things are outside things. So for you as a Libyan in the UK, looking at 9/11 and looking at Iraq, we spoke about identity earlier, those are external observations, but you still care more about this one. And I think that it's because Arab blood is cheaper because of the way that Arabs are portrayed and objectified, continually objectified.
Who writes the narrative?
I want to jump in here because you see when you're talking about that dehumanization project, that again is an ongoing one as well. Insofar that and this is what I was raising yesterday in terms of at what point does political violence delegitimize a government? Because you're quite right to mention Iraq and the near million people who were killed there at the behest of Bush and Blair, and kind of feeding into the point of neo-colonization to bring the conversation there. That's my view when I look at foreign international intervention in the MENA region, or Africa, or Latin America, or Asia. I view it in that context of neo-colonization. What I'm saying is, just like before, when they talked about the colonizers, when they talked about these people are barbarians, or these people are three-fifths of human beings, or these people are not worthy to rule themselves ultimately, right? Today, they couch it in a different, again, the protectorate. Let's just stick on the protectorate angle. The euphemism back then was, we're coming here to protect you. Same way today, when NATO decides to invade or intervene, they couch it in a language of human rights, and they couch it in a language of, responsibility to protect, of course. So what's happened is it's just become more highbrow, I think, but the material effect, or there is no operative difference, is my point, with regards to colonization in that era, right, and the justifications for colonization and neo-colonization.
You think the language has evolved?
But it's fundamentally.
I think the language has definitely evolved. Of course.
It's evolved, but used for the same purposes. And I think it's a very interesting point. And I think to try and, I hope to be able to wrap it up maybe a little bit with this, but the reason that the methodology maybe has remained the same is because the centers of power are the same, because then and now the center of power lied in the West, and the center of the narrative, or the global construction of the dominant narrative of that cultural hegemony, is in the West. Like, if people are going to resist their own dehumanization, then I don't know, like maybe this could be an interesting question is it more about deconstructing that dominant force, which is constructing your narrative, which dehumanizes you, or dehumanizes you by implication in terms of them lifting up their own culture and lifting up their own narrative, or do you build an alternative narrative? Does the rest of the world that isn't the West have to affirm their own humanity and reclaim their own history and claim their own future?
I think if you accept that, if you accept, even for argument's sake, that neo-colonization is just a rebranding of old-style colonization, protectorate, responsibility to protect, then it falls upon you to kind of eschew the whole framework, right? And say, for example, the case of Libya, right? So this is what I'm calling for. People misunderstand what I'm saying. I obviously have my personal views on Gaddafi and the good things that he did. There's going to be negative things that he did as well. But my point is always that it's upon the people themselves to do it themselves without international kind of support. Now, that may be subject to whether it's practical or whatnot, but my point is that when it comes to colonization in the past or the present, they always relied upon local agents. Even when you look at the Haitian Revolution, you see that the people who were mixed French and Haitian, right? A lot of them were killed as well alongside the French because they were in the service of the French. Do you know what I'm saying? So the point I'm making is ultimately that if you can see, hold on a sec, there's a propaganda campaign here. That doesn't mean that I need to be acquiescent to whoever is ruling. It's about how is it that we, on our own terms, kind of deal with these issues. But the reality is, when we're looking at any modern example, any contemporary example, we see that these revolutions have been weaponized. Popular discontent has been weaponized and utilized in soft coups in for example, Tunisia, much along the lines of like color revolutions across Europe. And in Syria, like in a hard coup or attempts at a hard coup, utilizing, jihadists basically. So this will be interesting. Maybe we can touch upon the use of auxiliary forces by the empire, by the Pax Americana, the use of auxiliary forces in local settings. Yeah. By the global kind of
Sean, can I come into this bit? Yeah. This seems like, have you seen
I'm going to drop, guys. I'm going to go and read some Quran, but thank you very much. It's been very interesting to listen to. So I'll speak to you soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, sure. So have you seen Django?
Django. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Have you seen Jamie Foxx's role as the kind of the black guy that oppresses his own people? Like he gets used as a sub slave owner.
But obviously, Leonardo DiCaprio is a great actor, right? Like people thought he was just this kind of pretty boy back in Titanic or whatever. But I think he showed himself just a little.
Yeah, no, he isn't amazing. But
actor, right? Like a little plug for Leo. But,
this is like what's happening now with Arabs. You know, the West is using certain Arab states as their own puppeteer to oppress other Arab states, like Saudi oppressing Yemen, for example.
Wasn't it phrenology, right? Like he was talking about in the thing about it's crazy, but he's such a great actor. He was talking about the 10,000 one out of every 10,000 black people are the exceptional black plague. Right? Remember, and he was saying that Jamie Foxx is that guy, and that, therefore his character is that guy, and therefore
but
own slaves, and
they do it to legitimize what they're doing.
I think Zoe was right. I think he's saying, what he was saying is that people should, that they can't let these revolutions and these civil contents become part of someone else's story. The people need to take control of the narrative from start to finish in terms of saying that we are going to be opposing these despots for our own benefit, for our own reasons, and it's part of our own narrative, not for the benefit of someone else, right? And this idea of using local rulers for that goes way back, man, all the way back to the Romans, to the Persians, even like 3,000-4,000 years ago. You could say the first true empire in history under the Akkadians, that became a successful empire because it was predicated on allowing a certain amount of autonomy for local rulers, and people. it's just logic, right? Like that if you want to project power like as a minority over the majority, you have to have certain institutions and ideologies in place that justify your power.
Yeah, true.
And right. Like, but anyway,
but this is where the problem of free market economics come in, because I get the impression that Arab leaders are very motivated by short-term gains, and they overlook what undermines their long-term power. So it might suit them in the short term to allow America to set up a military base in Djibouti, for example, because they might get a certain payout from it or whatever. But in the long term, it undermines the power that we're trying to consolidate. And I think I know a lot of people don't like Abdel Nasser, right? But the reason I really I respect the guy. I respect Gamal Abdel Nasser because he's one of the very few people that allowed himself to be harmed by the short term for a greater good by trying to sanction the Suez Canal from imperial use to make a greater statement and to
nationalizing.
Yeah, definitely. We don't have this now.
I'm just joking. I said, don't nationalize everything.
Yeah, so I just don't, when they teach us economics at school and university and they tell us that it's a very rational game and the invisible hand just makes everything fall into place, I don't buy it. It's bullshit. It lives.
I think it's. It's a brilliant point, because it reminds me of a point I wanted to make yesterday. How the seeming opponents of the West, meaning the Islamists, right? Islamists are framed as being the opponents of the West, are the champions of the free market and the neoliberal project. So I think it's really interesting how in most of these post-revolutionary countries, what's occurred is that it's gone back to the same state of play. We were talking about Tunisia yesterday. We're talking about exactly what you said about short-term gains. So instead of building up national industries, instead of putting up tariffs and barriers in order to facilitate national industries to grow and develop, extending government loans to these industries, creating an environment which supports development and the national development. What they do is just they open up the markets and allow the neoliberal project to reign free, and that comes with a lot of baggage. It comes with a lot of negativity, just like you said. Short-term gain, but long-term debt is placed upon the country, and so what they're doing essentially is selling the country down the river. But yeah, it's like I think someone said earlier about how it's an age-old story where you have a vassal state, and that vassal state basically just works in your favor, right? The question is, how is it that we can equip ourselves with the eye, or the critical eye, in order that we can know who's working for who and go beyond the rhetoric? Because that's the thing, isn't it? Yesterday we were talking about Tunisia, and even I got caught up in it, where instead of talking about, okay, so what is it that unites? So you've got the so-called Islamists and the so-called far left in a unison, in a political unity, but yet they're not just pro-US. I was mistaken when I said that was the only thing that unites them. What they are is pro-neoliberal. They're both pro-neoliberal. So it's the end of history in that sense.
Yeah, to answer that point, I think that you also have to just consider maybe that any time that there is a central power, that people who are craven, that want wealth, want power, will sometimes seek to cater to that center of power for the advancement of their own power, right? Like the ultimate, you could say that we're trying to put a plaster on a bleeding artery when we should be trying to move beyond a unipolar world, which, I mean, you could say hasn't been the case for thousands of years. It's the birth of cities and urbanization like 10,000 years ago, right? Like